He was a billionaire CEO with everything. Until a barefoot boy pulled at his sleeve and whispered, "Please, my sisters are hungry." That one sentence shattered his perfect world and set him on a journey of love, sacrifice, and a family he never expected, yet couldn't live without. Before we continue, leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from so we can greet you. Now, let's dive into the story. The sun was slowly rising over Los Angeles as Noah Weston adjusted the hem of his sharp suit and walked through the revolving glass doors of Western Global. The city buzzed around him. Shiny black cars honking, taxis speeding by, and high heels clicking briskly along the sidewalk. Another day of risk. Another boardroom battle to win. His mind was already calculating profit margins when something unexpected caught his attention. A gentle tug on his sleeve. Noah Weston spun around instinctively, more out of reflex than fear, startled by the soft urgency in the child's voice. His first thought was confusion. Why was there a child on the sidewalk outside his corporate headquarters in downtown Los Angeles? But when he looked down, what he saw completely shattered his assumptions. The boy couldn't have been older than 9. His bare feet were rough and gray with city dust. His clothes, once a light blue, were faded and frayed. His hair, a tangled mop of sandy brown, framed a face that was far too serious for someone so young. His hazel eyes, wide but wary, met Noah's with an unsettling steadiness that froze him in place. Ethan didn't speak right away. Instead, he shifted slightly, revealing 2 small girls clinging to him. One stood just behind his left leg, the other half hidden behind his right. They appeared to be identical, perhaps twins, around 5 years old. They wore oversized sweaters and mismatched dresses, their curly hair unkempt and sun-bleached at the tips. They didn't cry. They didn't smile. They simply stared, unmoving, like deer caught in the headlights of a world far too fast and too big. Noah crouched slowly, feeling the tightness of his suit and not caring for once. He met Ethan's eyes and asked gently, "What's your name, son?" "Ethan." The boy answered without hesitation, though his voice quivered. "And these are my sisters, Ava and Mia." Noah scanned the area, looking for a parent, a social worker, anyone, but there was no one. The sidewalk was alive with busy suits, sunglasses, and the sharp click of heels. Everyone passed by as if these children didn't exist. "And your parents?" Noah asked, careful not to sound too harsh. Ethan lowered his gaze. "Mom's at St. Emily's," he whispered. "She's in a coma. A drunk driver hit her after work." His voice grew even softer. "Dad left before that. He didn't want us anymore." The words hit Noah like a slap of cold air. He felt the world shift around him. This wasn't some scripted moment or city drama seeking sympathy. This was a real child, in real pain, standing outside a building bearing Noah's name, asking for help because there was no one else to turn. Tom too. "Where are you staying?" Noah asked, his heart pounding. "We were in foster care," Ethan replied, lifting his chin in defiance. "But they said they'd separate us. Different homes. I couldn't let them do that. So we ran." Noah's throat tightened. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals, outsmarted corporate rivals, but none of that had prepared him for the fierce courage of this 9-year-old, out in the streets, caring for 2 sisters because the system meant to protect them, threatened to tear them apart. He looked at Ethan again, really looked, and saw not a child begging, but a brother standing in the storm, shielding the only family he had left. And in that moment, something inside Noah Weston changed forever. Noah stood still on the sun-warmed concrete as the weight of Ethan's words settled over him like an unexpected storm cloud. Los Angeles continued its usual blur. Honking horns, polished shoes, distant chatter. But for Noah, time seemed to slow. All he could see were the eyes of the boy before him. Hazel, haunted, far too old for his 9 years. "You're hungry?" Noah asked again, his voice softer now. "Quiet this time." Ethan nodded, pressing his lips together as if trying to hold back more words. His arms instinctively tightened around Ava and Mia, who clung to him like small shadows. They didn't cry, they didn't beg, they simply waited, small, silent, and still. Noah looked down at his Italian leather shoes, then at the tailored cuff of his pale blue suit brushing against the boy's worn shirt. Every part of his mind screamed for logic, for a protocol, for delegation. Call security. Call someone. This wasn't his problem. It shouldn't be his problem. But his heart, the part he'd buried beneath contracts and quarterly reports, was screaming something different. He crouched, meeting Ethan's eyes at their level. "Do you trust me enough to come with me?" he asked gently. Ethan hesitated, narrowing his eyes as if searching for a catch. "Where?" "Somewhere with food. Real food," Noah said, "and somewhere safe." The boy didn't move for several seconds. Then, slowly, with one hand still gripping Ava's, he reached out and took Noah's. It was the smallest gesture, and it changed everything. Noah stood and opened the door to his waiting town car. His driver, Louise, who'd worked for him for nearly a decade, raised an eyebrow in confusion, but said nothing. Noah gestured for the children to climb in first, helping Ava when she struggled with the step. The inside of the car, black leather seats, cold air conditioning, seemed too pristine for the 3 weary figures now seated beside him. The girls huddled close to Ethan, their eyes darting nervously around the unfamiliar space, like they expected to be thrown out at any moment. Noah leaned forward. "Louise, take us to Clover Cafe on Fairfax. No stops." Without hesitation, he pulled out his phone and called his assistant. "Cancel everything for the day. No reschedules. Just cancel." "But Mr. Weston..." "No explanations," he said flatly. "Just do it." He hung up and turned back to the kids. No one spoke, but as the car pulled away from the curb, Noah looked at their reflection in the glass and realized what he had just done. He had stepped off the road he'd walked for decades, towards something unknown, messy, and dangerous. Yet, as Ava rested her head against Ethan's shoulder, and Ethan sat upright, guarding them like a soldier, Noah felt something in his chest click into place. He had made the impossible decision, and didn't regret it for a second. The small cafe tucked into the corner of Westwood Boulevard wasn't the kind of place Noah Weston usually entered. He was more used to 5-star business lounges and rooftop bistros with skyline views. But today, everything was different. Today, he wasn't ordering for investors or negotiating billion-dollar contracts. He was walking into a diner with 3 exhausted children, barely reaching his waist. The bell above the door chimed as they entered. The host glanced up, ready to speak, then paused when he saw the children. Barefoot, thin, their clothes clinging awkwardly to their small frames. Noah didn't flinch. "Table for 4, he said simply, placing a firm hand on Ethan's shoulder. They were seated in a booth by the window. The twins, Ava and Mia, sat side by side, backs straight, hands folded nervously in their laps. Ethan stood for a second, scanning the diner like he expected someone to tell them to leave. Noah gently motioned to the seat across from him. "It's okay, buddy. Sit." When the waitress approached, she blinked at the unusual group before her. "What can I get you folks?" Ethan looked at her, then at Noah. "Can my sisters get oatmeal?" he asked, his voice small but clear. "And maybe eggs too, if it's not too much." Noah's throat tightened. He looked at the waitress. "Bring whatever they want. And hot chocolate with whipped cream." As the food arrived, Noah watched the transformation unfold before him. The twins' hesitation melted into hunger as they clutched their spoons and began eating in silence. Oatmeal, disappearing in frantic little bites. Their eyes didn't wander. They didn't laugh. They didn't speak. But their bodies leaned toward the warmth of the food, like flowers turning toward the sun. Ethan, however, remained cautious. He carefully peeled apart a piece of toast, spreading a thin layer of jelly on it before handing it to Mia. Then he poured water into a cup and offered it to Ava before taking a bite himself. Every move was protective, as if he had done this many times before. Like being 9 years old had never been an option. Noah sat across from them, a quiet witness. He had faced angry shareholders, global logistics failures, and government investigations. But nothing had left him this breathless. He wasn't just seeing hunger. He was seeing resilience. He was seeing a boy who had kept his family alive when no one else had stepped up. The truth hit him like a punch to the chest. These weren't just kids who needed a meal. They were kids who had fallen through every safety net, who had survived by loving each other fiercely in a world that hadn't loved them back. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You did good, Ethan," he said softly. "Really good. There is one more thing I want to do. Can I visit your mother?" Noah asked. Ethan didn't answer, but for the first time he looked Noah directly in the eyes, and Noah knew something had begun to shift, not just in Ethan, but in himself, the Ghani. Sliding doors of St. Emily's Hospital opened with a soft hiss. But to Noah Weston, they sounded like the gates to another world, one he had never imagined himself walking into. The sterile brightness of the intensive care unit contrasted sharply with the emotional weight pressing down on him. Beside him, Ethan walked with quiet determination, leading his little sisters through the maze of hospital hallways like he'd done it before. And that realization struck Noah harder than he expected. No child should be this familiar with a hospital floor plan. A nurse at the station looked up, puzzled by the presence of a sharply dressed man accompanied by 3 underfed, visibly exhausted children. Noah stepped forward. "We're here for Rachel Evans. She's their mother." The nurse hesitated, then checked the system. "Room 407. Still no changes in her chart this morning," she said gently, her eyes flicking back to the kids. Ethan didn't wait. He took Ava and Mia's hands, his own fingers trembling slightly, and led them toward the room. Noah followed silently, his footsteps almost too loud against the polished floor. As they reached the doorway, Noah paused. He hadn't prepared for what he might see, and nothing could have prepared him for what he did. Rachel Evans lay motionless in the hospital bed, her face pale, her lips dry. A nasal cannula delivered oxygen in shallow rhythms, IV lines threaded into her arms, and machines blinked and beeped steadily at her side. She looked small, too small for someone who had once carried 3 children through the chaos of life with no help. Her stillness was haunting. Ethan stepped closer to her bed and slowly released his sister's hands. He reached out and gently touched his mother's fingers. "Mama," he whispered, his voice cracking with something that had been held in for far too long. "We're okay. I told you I'd keep them safe." Ava clung to Ethan's shirt. Mia stood, still, staring wide-eyed at the machines. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the life support machines. It felt like time had stopped. Noah stood just inside the doorway, frozen. His usual instincts, control, logic, strategy, had no place here. He felt stripped of every power he had relied on in business. This wasn't a hostile merger. This wasn't a market crisis. This was a boy speaking to his mother as if his words could pull her back from the edge, and it broke something in Noah. For years, he had given speeches about philanthropy and giving back, talked about impact in press releases and charity galas. But here, watching these kids by their mother's bedside, none of those words meant anything. This wasn't charity. This was heartbreak. This was love. And in that fragile moment, something inside Noah shifted. He wasn't just witnessing this family's pain, he was becoming part of it. Quietly, he stepped back into the hallway, wiped at the sudden sting in his eyes, and waited. He didn't know what would come next, but deep in his gut, he knew he wouldn't walk away. Not now. Not ever. The ride back to the Hollywood Hills apartment was quiet, but the silence wasn't empty. It was full of unspoken questions, fears, and the weight of what came next. Noah Weston sat in the back seat beside Ethan, who stared out the window with a mixture of suspicion and exhaustion. Ava and Mia were curled up on either side of him, already drifting into sleep, their tiny hands clutching the edges of Noah's coat as if afraid to let go. When they arrived at his penthouse, perched high above Sunset Boulevard with its sleek, modern lines and curated perfection, Noah opened the door and let them walk in first. The moment they crossed the threshold, everything felt wrong. Not because of the children, but because the space, though luxurious, wasn't made for them. It had never been made for anyone but Noah himself. And now, 3 barefoot kids stood on his polished floors like ghosts in a museum. The girls clung to Ethan, their wide eyes scanning the white walls, the steel fixtures, the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the shimmering city below. None of it impressed them. None of it meant anything. It was too big, too cold, too foreign. Noah knelt down to their level. "You're safe here," he said gently. "Just for now. You can eat, sleep, rest. Tomorrow, we'll figure out the rest." Ava looked at him but said nothing. Instead, she slowly reached for his hand. The gesture was small, but it hit Noah like a blow to the chest. She didn't know him, but she wanted to believe. That night, Noah scrambled. He ordered food, called in extra blankets, soft pajamas, children's clothes. He set up the guest room with what little he had, laying out folded towels and placing water by each bedside. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. The children sat around the kitchen island eating peanut butter toast and drinking warm milk. Mia giggled once at the television, a sound so pure it made Noah freeze mid-step. For the first time in days, maybe longer, they weren't on alert. They weren't flinching at every movement. They were just kids. When they finally fell asleep, huddled together in the guest room, Noah stood in the hallway, staring through the cracked door at their small forms, tangled beneath the blankets. The city lights glittered outside the windows, but inside, something deeper was shining. He knew this wasn't a long-term solution. He wasn't their father. He wasn't even sure what he was yet, but one thing was already clear. He couldn't turn away. No one had shown up for these children, so he had. And now that they were here, sleeping under his roof, wrapped in second-hand clothes and a stranger's promise, he realized something else. There was no going back, not for them, and not for him. The morning sunlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Noah Weston's penthouse, casting long streaks across the sleek marble tiles. But for the first time in years, Noah wasn't looking at his reflection in the glass. He was staring at the 3 children still asleep in the guest room. Ethan curled protectively between Ava and Mia, the covers tangled around their small bodies. His espresso had gone cold in his hand. Noah Weston had made countless life-altering decisions over breakfast. Corporate acquisitions, mergers, international expansions. But none of them felt like this. This wasn't business. This was life. Raw and real. Staring him in the face, with the soft breathing of children who had nowhere else to go. He set his mug down, walked into his study, and picked up the phone. His voice, usually smooth and commanding, cracked slightly as he spoke. "Laura, it's me. Get the legal team. I need to know what it takes to file for temporary guardianship of 3 minors today." There was a pause, then a rushed, "Yes, Mr. Weston. Right away." He hung up and exhaled deeply, pressing a hand to his chest. His heart raced, not from fear, but from something else. Urgency. Purpose. A flicker of something that had been missing for far too long. Then, almost as an afterthought, He picked up the phone again. "One more thing," he said. "I want to pay all of Rachel Evans' hospital bills. Everything. Backdated. Private care. Specialists. Whatever it takes." The silence on the other end was heavier this time. "Understood," Laura replied gently. "Should I note this for the press?" "No," Noah snapped, then softened. "No press, no announcement. Just do it." After he ended the call, he walked back to the guest room. Ava stirred, rubbing her eyes. Mia's thumb was in her mouth, still fast asleep. Ethan opened his eyes when Noah stepped inside. He didn't speak, just stared, guarded but curious. Noah knelt beside the bed, lowering his voice. "I'm going to help you. All of you. That means doing things right. Paperwork, the law, everything. So nobody can take you from each other or from me." Ethan sat up, uncertain. "Even if my mom wakes up?" Noah didn't hesitate. "Especially then. She deserves to see her kids safe. Together." Ethan gave a tiny nod, barely perceptible, but it held the weight of trust, hard-earned on the streets. That afternoon, Noah began filling out documents he never thought he'd see. Medical histories, emergency contacts, guardian declarations. He signed them all. Each pen stroke was a vow, not just to the system, but to the children still napping in his home. He wasn't doing this out of pity. He wasn't doing it for the image. He was doing it because 3 strangers had tugged at his sleeve and pulled him out of the lonely empire he had built. And now, there was no turning back. Noah stood in the doorway of the guest room, watching the children sleep. It had been 3 days since he brought Ethan, Ava, and Mia into his home. And in that time, his world had completely shifted. The penthouse, once silent and pristine, was now filled with the faint sounds of cartoons, the soft patter of small feet on hardwood floors, and the scent of warm milk and jam toast. But it was the presence of 3 frightened children, each carrying more emotional weight than any child ever should, that had changed everything. Noah knew he couldn't do this alone. That's why, on the morning after their first night, he made a call. Teresa Chong arrived just after breakfast, a retired pediatric nurse in her late 60s, with a warm voice and eyes that seemed to understand more than words could say. She didn't ask for explanations. She simply smiled, set her bag down, and started folding the children's laundry with Mia at her side, chatting softly like they'd known each other for years. From the kitchen, Noah watched with quiet awe. Teresa didn't try to take control. She created space, gentle, safe, and calm. The children, especially Ava and Mia, responded instantly. They began following her around the apartment like ducklings, trusting her in a way that made Noah feel both grateful and inadequate. That night, for the first time since they'd arrived, the girls didn't cry when the lights were turned off. Ava even allowed Teresa to tuck her in, while Mia, who had clung to Ethan constantly, let go long enough to cuddle a new stuffed bunny Teresa had brought with her. Noah turned to Ethan, who stood in the hallway, still dressed, still stiff. "You okay?" he asked. Ethan nodded but didn't speak. He kept glancing toward the door, his posture rigid like a soldier on watch. "You don't have to stay up," Noah said gently. "They're safe now. You're safe." But Ethan only shook his torn head. "What if something happens? What if someone comes?" Noah knelt beside him, placing a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "No one's coming to take you away. Not tonight. Not ever, if I can help it." Ethan blinked quickly but said nothing. He didn't hug Noah. He didn't cry. But he stayed still for just a second longer than before. And that was enough. That night, as Noah lay awake in bed, he realized something profound. He had faced corporate crises, media scandals, and billion-dollar negotiations, but none of it had prepared him for this. The slow, painstaking, beautiful work of learning to father. Not by title, not by blood, but by presence, by consistency, by love. And as the quiet of the night settled over his home, Noah understood this wasn't just temporary. These children weren't just visitors. They were becoming family. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. Noah Weston was used to scrutiny. In the corporate world, every word he said was weighed, every decision analyzed by boardrooms full of people who questioned his every move. But nothing, not a shareholder rebellion, not a hostile takeover, had ever made him feel the kind of pressure he felt that morning when a social worker stepped into his penthouse, clipboard in hand, and narrowed her eyes. Her name was Ms. Park. She was petite, maybe in her early 50s, with silver streaks in her dark hair pulled tightly into a bun. She wore square glasses and an expression that could slice through granite. Behind her stood a second agent with a child psychology background, who mostly stayed silent but jotted down notes with ruthless precision. The children were in their rooms with Teresa, the live-in pediatric nurse Noah had hired. He had told her in advance to keep them relaxed and occupied. Coloring, puzzles, maybe soft music playing in the background. He didn't want them exposed to this part. Not yet. Ms. Park glanced around the penthouse, as if inspecting a staged property for flaws. Her eyes moved from the polished marble floors to the modern art on the walls, to the sleek leather furniture, which still bore faint evidence of crayon marks and cookie crumbs. The scent of lavender cleaning spray still lingered in the air from the deep clean Noah had ordered the night before. "You've certainly made an effort to accommodate children," she said with a clipped tone, making a note on her clipboard. Noah nodded, standing with his hands clasped behind his back. "It's their home now." Ms. Park didn't look up. "That's what we're here to determine." Noah bristled, but held his composure. He had faced billion-dollar audits with less tension than this meeting. She moved through the apartment with the authority of someone who had seen too many well-meaning volunteers and too many children hurt by broken promises. The children's room, newly furnished with bunk beds, picture books, nightlights shaped like stars, got only a quick glance. She checked the bathroom, the pantry, the emergency contact list taped to the fridge. Finally, she turned and looked directly at Noah. "Mr. Weston," she said slowly, "you're a very powerful man. You run a company worth billions. You're used to results, to control, to delegating. But fostering 3 traumatized children is not a matter of strategy. It cannot be managed like an acquisition or a quarterly objective." Her words stung more than he expected. Noah exhaled and stepped closer. "I know," he said, voice low and deliberate. "This isn't a business transaction. I didn't bring them here for appearances or charity. I brought them here because they had nowhere else to go, because they were going to be split up. And Ethan? He's just a kid. He was holding them together by sheer will. I couldn't walk away from that." Ms. Park raised an eyebrow. "You expect me to believe that a man who's never even owned a decent pet suddenly wants to care for 3 children?" "No," Noah said softly. "I don't expect you to believe anything. I expect you to watch. Stay as long as you want. Ask any question. Interview any staff. Look at my schedule. I've rearranged every part of my life for them. Not out of guilt. Not because someone told me to, but because I want to. I choose them." There was a pause. The psychologist scribbled something but didn't interrupt. Ms. Park tapped her pen thoughtfully on the clipboard. "There's still a long road ahead," she said. "Trauma like theirs doesn't go away with warm meals and new beds. They've lived in survival mode for too long. And you're new to this. You don't yet understand what happens when the children you care about break down in ways that don't have easy fixes." "I don't," Noah admitted. "But I'm willing to learn. I'm not asking for perfection. I'm just asking for time." Ms. Park studied him. Really studied him. She wasn't a woman easily swayed. But even she couldn't deny the flicker of something different in Noah Weston's eyes. It wasn't polished or corporate. It was raw, honest. After a long beat, she finally nodded. We'll begin with a 6-week evaluation, weekly visits, psychological assessments for the children, and I'll want updates on their schooling, their health, and your legal representation. You'll have everything you need, Noah said. I'll cooperate fully. As she turned to leave, she paused by the door and glanced over her shoulder. Just one more thing, Mr. Weston. Yes? If this gets hard, and it will, you don't get to quit. You don't get to change your mind. These kids, they've already lost too much. Noah's voice caught in his throat. He looked her straight in the eye. I'm not going anywhere. The door closed with a quiet click, leaving Noah standing in the stillness of his transformed home. Down the hall, he could hear faint giggles from Ava and Mia, and the gentle rhythm of Ethan's voice reading aloud. He leaned against the wall, closed his eyes, and exhaled the fear he hadn't realized he was holding. This wasn't a test he could ace. It was a life he was building. And he was all in. The evening air in the penthouse was still, the city lights casting a warm orange glow across the tall windows. Ava and Mia were curled up in their blankets, watching a cartoon quietly on the couch, their small heads leaning against each other, their bodies relaxed for the first time all day. Ethan was in the corner, organizing their few belongings again, folding their extra clothes, lining up their shoes by size. He did it every night, as if order would make everything feel safer. Noah Weston stood in the doorway, watching them with a bowl of popcorn in one hand. He had started to understand their unspoken habits, the way Ethan would check the locks twice before lying down, the way the girls clung to him when he left the room, even for a moment. They were children who had learned how quickly the ground beneath them could disappear. As the episode ended, Noah called softly, "Time to brush teeth and pick out pajamas." The twins groaned but obeyed. Ethan followed close behind, holding Mia's hand as they shuffled down the hall toward the guest room. Now their room. Later, as he tucked them in, Noah sat beside Mia and smoothed her curls from her forehead. "Do you want the nightlight on?" he asked. She shook her head slightly, her voice barely a whisper. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. Do we have to go back?" Her eyes were wide, searching, filled with something deeper than curiosity. "To the place with the green walls." Noah didn't understand at first. "What green walls, honey?" "The place they took us." Ava piped in, her voice shaky. "When Mama went to sleep, it smelled like medicine and metal. They said we couldn't stay with Ethan." Noah felt the breath catch in his chest. Ethan, who had been quiet all evening, sat up a little straighter in his bed across the room. "That's the foster intake center," he said softly. "That's where they took us when the ambulance took Mom. They told me we couldn't stay together, that they were going to send us to different homes." His voice tightened. "So I ran. I took them and left." Noah sat still for a moment, absorbing the weight of that simple confession. A boy just 9 years old had fled the system with 2 toddlers because he understood what separation would do to them, because he feared being alone more than sleeping on the street. Mia was now clutching her blanket tightly. "Are we going back?" Noah leaned in, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "No, you are not going back. Not to that place. Not now. Not ever." The girls didn't say anything at first. They just looked at him, as if trying to decide whether they could believe him, whether the comfort of this moment was real or just something borrowed. Finally, Ava let out a little breath and nestled deeper under the blanket. Mia scooted toward her brother's bed, curling up near his feet. Ethan didn't stop her. Noah stood up and walked to the light switch, pausing just before he flipped it. "Good night," he said softly. "Good night, Mr. Weston," Ethan said automatically, then added more quietly. "Thank you." Back in the hallway, Noah leaned against the wall, the ache in his chest too familiar now. The green walls, the intake center, the way Ethan had stepped in as a parent when no one else would. It haunted him. He returned to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and stared out at the skyline. These kids hadn't just been abandoned by a system. They had been forgotten by everyone meant to protect them. Everyone but each other. Few minutes later, he heard the quiet patter of small feet. Ethan stood in the kitchen doorway, eyes shadowed but calm. "I'm sorry if we made you sad." Noah shook his head. "You didn't. I just wish I'd found you sooner." Ethan nodded once, like he understood too well the concept of being too late. "Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't stopped you outside your building." Noah turned to face him fully. "And I think about what would have happened if I hadn't listened." Ethan looked at the floor. "They didn't believe me at the center when I said we had to stay together. They said it wasn't possible. But it was." Noah replied, his voice firm. "You made it possible. And now I will." For the first time, something softened in Ethan's eyes. It wasn't a full smile. Not yet. But it was something close. "Okay," he whispered. "Good night." "Good night, Ethan." As the boy turned and padded back toward the bedroom, Noah sat down heavily at the table. His company, his success, the empire he'd built, it all meant nothing compared to this. To being the anchor for 3 children who had lost their world and still managed to survive it. And now, he had promised they would never be torn apart again. Not on his watch, not ever. Noah Weston sat alone in his dimly lit home office, the soft hum of Los Angeles echoing through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. It was nearly midnight. The city buzzed with energy, but in this room, time had slowed to a crawl. A thick manila folder sat unopened on the desk in front of him, marked with a single name that had been repeating in his mind for days. Rachel Evans. He had requested the file from St. Emily's Hospital after the visit to the ICU. He didn't know why exactly. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe obligation. But now, with the children asleep down the hall, he finally felt ready to open it. He took a slow breath, then peeled back the cover. Inside was the reality of a woman who had been reduced to vitals and medical codes. Age, 34. Occupation, medical assistant. Emergency contact, none listed. Insurance, lapsed. Admission notes, hit by a drunk driver 2 blocks from her night shift job. Fractured skull, multiple internal injuries, induced coma. But buried between the clinical lines, the margins whispered the real story. Noah leaned back, his brow tightening as he read. Rachel had been working 2 jobs, one full-time at a clinic in Westlake and another cleaning offices downtown just to make ends meet. No other listed relatives, no father in the picture. A nurse had scribbled a note in the margin. Patients spoke often about her 3 children prior to sedation. Very concerned they stay together. He stopped, eyes fixed on that sentence. It explained everything. Why Ethan had taken on so much. Why he'd run rather than be split apart from his sisters. Why even now, Ava and Mia rarely left each other's sides. Rachel hadn't just loved her children. She had sacrificed everything to keep them together. Noah remembered the look in Ethan's eyes that first morning, the guarded edge, the quiet pride. He hadn't been trying to impress anyone. He was surviving. He was protecting because he had been taught to, not by a system, but by her. Rachel had given them everything she had right up until the night she collapsed in that intersection, and the world had just moved on. No one had come for the children. No support network. No safety net. Just silence and red tape. Noah stood and walked to the window. Below, the city lights flickered across the skyline. A million stories unfolding in buildings like his. And yet somehow, hers, the most important one, had nearly disappeared without notice. He had been one of those people. For years, Noah Weston had existed above the fray. His world was numbers, deals, outcomes. Empathy was for boardroom speeches and charity galas. He hadn't allowed space for anything more. But that had changed the moment Ethan tugged at his sleeve. His hand gripped the edge of the windowsill as a wave of realization crashed over him. Rachel Evans wasn't just some woman lying in a coma. She was the heartbeat of these children. Everything Ethan had done, from running away to rationing crackers in a dark apartment, was a reflection of her. She had taught him how to care, how to endure, how to fight for the people he loved. And now Noah was learning the same lesson, only backwards. A soft knock pulled him from his thoughts. It was Teresa, still dressed in her bathrobe, her silver hair pulled into a loose bun. "You okay?" she asked gently. He turned, folder still in hand. "I just finished reading Rachel's file." Teresa stepped into the room, her eyes scanning his tired face. She went through hell. She held everything together by herself. Noah said, his voice low, worked 2 jobs, no help, no partner, and when she collapsed, there was no one waiting. Just her kids. And they still weren't enough of a reason for anyone to come. Teresa walked over and placed a hand on his arm. "But you came." Noah didn't answer right away. He looked down at the manila folder in his hand, then at the hallway that led to the children's rooms. "I'm not trying to replace her," he said. "You're not," Teresa said. "You're standing in the gap until she can." He exhaled slowly, emotion tightening his chest. The story in that file wasn't just Rachel's. It was Ethan's. It was Ava's. It was Mia's. It was the story of resilience buried in places no one ever looked. And now, he saw it. All of it. The next day, Noah made a quiet decision. He called the hospital and upgraded Rachel's care. Private neurologist, dedicated rehab consultant, around-the-clock monitoring. Whatever she needed to wake up, to heal, to return, he would give it. Not because he owed her, but because she had already done the hardest part. She'd given the world 3 children strong enough to survive without her. Now, it was his turn to give her a world where she wouldn't have to anymore. The penthouse no longer looked like it belonged to the Noah Weston the world knew. Gone were the days when the gleaming white floors echoed with nothing but the sound of expensive shoes and the soft hum of a designer sound system. Now, there were tiny footprints on the hardwood, small socks tossed in corners, and faint crayon marks along the hallway wall. Remnants of Ava's attempt to decorate like the zoo. The once pristine silence had been replaced with sound. Real sound. Laughter, squeals, tiny footsteps chasing each other through the rooms. Morning cartoons hummed quietly from the living room TV, interrupted by fits of giggles or an occasional cereal bowl crash, followed by a child's dupe. Noah stood at the kitchen island one morning, holding a cup of black coffee he hadn't yet tasted. Across the room, Ethan was sitting at the dining table, helping Mia cut out paper stars while Ava insisted on taping hers to the window. Teresa, their living caregiver, moved effortlessly between the children, wiping hands, humming lullabies, straightening toys. It was chaos, but it was beautiful. He never used to pause like this. He had been a man of momentum, always calculating, always on the move, checking his phone while brushing his teeth, mentally preparing for mergers before his first cup of coffee. Now, he stood quietly, watching life unfold in front of him. Messy, unpredictable, and more meaningful than anything he'd ever experienced. It started small. The changes, the way Ava instinctively reached for his hand when they crossed the street, how Mia leaned her head on his shoulder when they watched cartoons. Ethan, though still guarded, had stopped flinching at every unexpected sound. And slowly, Noah saw the weight in the boy's eyes begin to lift. Just a little. They had routines now. Routines that had nothing to do with boardrooms or conference calls. There was warm milk before bed. Bedtime stories. Ones Noah butchered but read anyway, complete with terrible voices that made the girls laugh until they hiccuped. Ethan still insisted on brushing his sister's hair in the mornings, but he'd started to let Noah help. And then there was the moment that shook Noah to his core. It was a quiet Tuesday evening. The children had just finished dinner. Grilled cheese, cut into heart shapes by Teresa. Noah was helping Mia wash her hands at the sink when it happened. "Thanks, Dad," she said softly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Noah froze. He didn't correct her. He didn't react outwardly, but his heart stuttered, and he had to turn his face away for a moment, blinking hard as he helped her dry her fingers. "You're welcome, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice uneven. Later that night, when the kids were asleep and the apartment was quiet again, Noah sat in the dim living room, staring at the flickering shadows on the wall. He hadn't planned this. He hadn't even believed himself capable of it. But here he was. The children weren't guests anymore. They weren't a temporary responsibility or a good deed he could walk away from. They were his. Not by blood, not yet by law, but in all the ways that mattered. He had begun to measure time not in meetings or milestones, but in small victories. The first time Mia laughed in her sleep. The moment Ava asked to sit on his lap during story time. The day Ethan let Teresa help him with his math homework. None of these would appear in a quarterly report, but they were more valuable than any business triumph he'd ever known. And the girls. Oh, the girls. They had gone from clinging to each other like frightened kittens to skipping through the hallways, singing songs about princesses and pancakes. Ava had a habit of stealing his socks, convinced they made her run faster. Mia often brought him wrinkled construction paper drawings with crooked hearts and stick figures. "That's you," she'd say proudly, pointing at a tall blob next to 3 smaller ones. Even Ethan had begun to open up. The boy who once sat stiffly at the edge of the room now joined family dinners, even smiled occasionally, rare and fleeting, but real. Noah looked around and realized something profound. This life, with all its clutter and chaos, had become his greatest achievement. This messy, loud, imperfect home was the first place he'd ever truly felt complete. The penthouse hadn't just changed in appearance. It had transformed in meaning. It was no longer a monument to isolation and success. It had become a sanctuary, a haven of healing and rediscovery, built not on silence and structure, but on giggles, bedtime songs, and love. And in the quiet aftermath of Mia's accidental dad, Noah finally understood. He had become someone new, someone softer, someone stronger, someone who was no longer afraid to love and be loved in return. It was a quiet Thursday morning, the kind of soft gray that hung over Los Angeles like a damp curtain. Noah Weston had just dropped off Ava and Mia at their preschool art class and Ethan at his summer reading group. The city felt calmer than usual. Or maybe it was just him. For once, his phone wasn't buzzing every 5 minutes. He was halfway through a rare, uninterrupted email when it rang. Caller ID. St. Emily's ICU. Noah's breath caught in his throat. For a full second, he just stared at the screen, his fingers frozen. His heart began pounding slow and hard as he picked up the call. "Mr. Weston?" The nurse's voice was firm but gentle. "Yes, this is he. I wanted to inform you. Rachel Evans, the patient you've been visiting, she's showing signs of waking up. Her eyes opened briefly this morning. She responded to verbal prompts. We're monitoring closely, but it looks promising." For a moment, Noah couldn't speak. He stood in the middle of his sleek office, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows and the silence of a life he no longer lived the same way. "She's awake." "Yes, we've informed the caseworker as well. But we thought you should hear it from us directly." "Thank you," Noah said, barely above a whisper. "I'm coming now." He didn't check his calendar. He didn't call his assistant. Instead, he left his office, coat still on the back of the chair, coffee untouched. His driver barely had time to register the urgency in Noah's voice before the car was speeding east toward the hospital. The ride was silent. Noah's hand gripped the armrest, his thoughts tumbling in 100 directions. He had imagined this moment before dozens of times, but now that it was real, he felt unsteady. What would she remember? Would she be angry? Grateful? What would this mean for the kids? For him? When he arrived, the nurses knew him by now. A young woman named Janelle greeted him with a nod and led him quickly through the long corridors of the ICU. The familiar scent of antiseptic hit his nose as they reached room 407. "She's still a little groggy," Janelle said softly. "Her vitals are holding. We're keeping stimulation low, but she's aware." Noah nodded and stepped inside. The room hadn't changed much. The same pale blue curtains, the same gentle hum of machines. But the energy was different now, charged with something fragile and impossible to define. The monitors beeped quietly beside her bed, but the woman lying there wasn't still anymore. Rachel's eyes were open, blinking slowly, unfocused. Her skin pale, lips dry. Her hair, once tied back neatly, now hung in messy strands across her forehead. She looked around, disoriented, until her gaze landed on him. Her brow furrowed slightly. She didn't recognize him. Noah approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. He pulled up the chair beside her bed and sat down carefully. "Rachel," he said gently, "my name is Noah Weston. I've been looking after your children while you've been here." Her lips parted, but no words came. "Ethan, Ava, Mia, they're safe. They're with me. Ethan found me. He asked for help." At the mention of their names, something shifted in her eyes. The fog lifted slightly. My children," she rasped, barely audible. Noah leaned in. "Yes, they're okay, all three. They never left each other. Ethan made sure of that." Tears filled her eyes instantly. Her hand trembled as she tried to lift it. Noah reached forward, gently placing his fingers over hers. Her grip was weak, but desperate. I thought they'd be taken from me," she whispered. "Separated." "They almost were," Noah admitted, his voice tightening. "But I stopped it. I filed for temporary guardianship, just to keep them together. Just until you were better." Rachel turned her face slightly, and tears spilled onto the pillow. "I tried so hard," she said. "I worked double shifts. I had no one. Their father, he left. And then the accident." Noah didn't say anything. There was nothing to fix right now. Just being here was enough. "You did everything you could," he said after a pause. "They love you so much. Ethan talks about you every day. He never let them forget you." Rachel cried softly. There were no dramatic declarations, just exhaustion, relief, guilt, love. Noah looked at her, and for a moment, he felt like he was finally seeing himself clearly. "I don't know," he said honestly. "At first, it was instinct. Then it became something else. I saw Ethan holding those girls like his life depended on it. And I saw myself, alone, chasing success, thinking I had everything. But I had nothing that mattered until them." Silence settled between them, heavy but meaningful. The machines in the room beeped softly. Outside, the hallway bustled with muted, hospital sounds. But inside, everything felt still. Rachel took a long breath and leaned back against the pillows, exhausted from the conversation, but somehow lighter. "I'm not ready to see them yet," she admitted, her voice small. "Not like this. I want to be stronger. I want them to remember me smiling. They understand," Noah said gently. "They ask about you every day. And when you're ready, they'll be here. Rachel gave a small nod. I'd like that. And I'd like you to keep being there for them until I can. I will, Noah promised. As long as they need me. Their eyes met again, and in that silent exchange was the unspoken agreement of two people who had both been brought to their knees by life and had chosen, against all odds, to stand for something more, not out of obligation, not out of pity, but out of love, shaped slowly through fear, pain, and resilience. A love that saved not just 3 children, but the adults who chose to fight for them. When the nurse stepped in again to check her vitals, Noah stood and looked back one more time. Rachel was watching him now, her eyes clearer. Thank you, she mouthed. And as he walked back down that quiet hallway, something inside him shifted again, deeper this time. Because this wasn't the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of another. One, a more complicated, more human, more beautiful one than he ever could have predicted. The sun was just beginning to climb over the Los Angeles skyline, casting a soft amber glow across the windows of Noah Weston's penthouse. Inside, the apartment was filled with a kind of energy that felt different from the sterile order it once knew. This was the energy of life, of motion, of family. Cereal bowls clinked, slippers shuffled on tile, and laughter, light, unguarded laughter, echoed faintly from the children's room. For weeks now, things had shifted from temporary to something more enduring. Noah had become someone the children didn't just trust, but leaned on, confided in, clung to when the nightmares still came. And now, Rachel Evans, the woman whose silent strength had raised these children alone before her coma, had become part of the picture again, not as a disruption, but as a missing piece falling into place. She visited regularly, her recovery slow but steady. She still walked with a cane and tired easily, but her spark had returned. At first, the visits were short, just long enough for hugs and tears and whispered reassurances. But soon, she started staying longer, even sharing meals and helping with bedtime routines. There was no tension between her and Noah, only quiet cooperation and something deeper, trust earned the hard way. One afternoon in mid-July, the entire household prepared for an outing that had started as a simple idea scribbled in pink crayon. A family trip to the zoo. It was Lily's idea, part of a family adventure list that now hung proudly on the fridge between magnets and crooked drawings of sunshine and stick figures. Noah had rented a van to accommodate the group. Himself, Rachel, Teresa, and the 3 kids. He packed snacks, loaded sunscreen, double-checked, water bottles, and even remembered wet wipes, which earned a playful eyebrow raise from Teresa. You're learning, she teased. Rachel met them outside, dressed in soft blue jeans and a loose cotton shirt. She was pale, but smiling, her cane steady in one hand. As she climbed into the van, Ava leaned forward from the back seat and reached out to grab her hand. Rachel blinked, back tears, and squeezed it. At the zoo, everything seemed to move in slow, beautiful chaos. Ethan led his sisters with pride, pointing out animals and reading signs like a junior tour guide. Ava shrieked with joy when she saw the flamingos, and Mia laughed so hard at the sight of a monkey picking its nose that a group of nearby parents chuckled in amusement. They fed goats at the petting zoo, ate peanut butter sandwiches in the shade, and posed for awkward, blurry photos near the elephant enclosure. Throughout it all, Rachel and Noah stayed a few steps behind the kids. Sometimes they talked, but often they simply watched. 2 people whose lives had collided in the most unexpected way, now tethered by something neither had chosen, but both had accepted fully. Near the giraffe exhibit, Rachel glanced sideways at Noah, her voice quiet. They're happy, aren't they? Noah followed her gaze to where Ava and Mia were holding hands, swinging their arms and giggling with Ethan, tossing bits of popcorn to birds nearby. They really are, he said. You can see it in their eyes. Rachel nodded, but her eyes were glassy. I never thought I'd see that again. After the accident, after waking up and not knowing where they were, I thought I'd ruined them, that I'd lost them forever. Noah didn't respond with words. Instead, he reached out and gently squeezed her hand. She didn't pull away. That simple touch, so full of understanding, of shared burden, of healing, meant more than any sentence either of them could have spoken. They weren't a couple. They weren't co-parents in the traditional sense. But in that moment, they were undeniably a team. By the time they returned home, the children were exhausted. Sunburned cheeks, dusty shoes, sticky fingers, signs of a day well lived. Teresa carried a sleeping Mia into the apartment while Noah guided Ava, who was still humming the song from the zoo's carousel. Rachel helped Ethan remove his sneakers at the door, and he looked up at her with a tired smile. "Best day ever," he said. That night, as the children slept, Ethan curled in his bunk. Ava and Mia tangled in a pile of blankets and plush animals. Noah and Rachel sat on the back porch with mugs of tea. The stars barely peeked through the city haze, but the warmth of the air and the hush of the night gave them space to breathe. Rachel broke the silence first. "I've been thinking about what happens next, about where I belong." Noah turned to her, waiting. "I want to find a small place nearby," she said. "Nothing big, just something close enough to visit often and maybe even have the kids overnight sometimes. I don't want to confuse them. I don't want to approve what they've built with you, but I want them to know I'm here. I want them to see me getting stronger." Noah nodded, his voice low. "You already are. They know that." She gave him a tired, grateful smile. "Thank you for everything." They sat in silence for a while longer, watching the faint lights from the nearby buildings flicker. There were no grand declarations, no decisions that needed finalizing in that moment. Just a shared understanding that healing took time, that family could be built in unexpected ways, and that love didn't have to follow rules. It just had to be real. Inside, one of the children stirred. A faint thump, then a muffled whimper. Noah stood up instinctively, setting down his cup. "Ethan," Rachel said gently, recognizing the sound. Noah nodded and disappeared into the apartment. Rachel remained on the porch, watching the doorway where he had gone, her heart filled with something that surprised her. Peace. Not jealousy, not loss, but peace. Because she saw now that the man her son had turned to on that sidewalk, the man in the light blue suit, had become something far greater than a rescuer. He had become part of their story, part of her children's healing, and maybe, if she allowed it, part of hers too. The courtroom wasn't grand, but it carried a kind of weight that made even the youngest feel its gravity. The walls were beige, the lighting soft, but to 9-year-old Ethan Evans, the wooden bench beneath him felt like a throne of judgment. His legs dangled above the polished floor, and beside him sat his twin sisters Ava and Mia, holding hands, their matching pink dresses wrinkled from fidgeting. Noah Weston sat on Ethan's other side, his jaw tight, hands folded in his lap. He wore no tie today, just a navy sweater and pressed slacks, an intentional choice to appear less like a CEO, more like a man, a protector, a father. Rachel Evans was there too. She sat in the row behind them, her hair neatly brushed, her cane propped beside her. Her cheeks were flushed, her hands clutching a folder of documents that had already been reviewed a dozen times. Though still healing, her eyes were sharp with clarity, her posture steady with determination. She had made peace with the choice ahead, not one of surrender, but of shared love. The judge entered with quiet authority, a woman in her 60s, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a low bun. She glanced through the file, flipping pages as she read the details of the case, guardianship, trauma recovery, and ultimately, love. When she looked up, her gaze was steady, This court is reviewing the final guardianship arrangement between Mr. Noah Weston and the minors, Ethan, Ava, and Mia Evans. Present is their biological mother, Miss Rachel Evans, who retains parental rights and will remain a legal guardian with shared access. This hearing is to formalize Mr. Weston's long-term guardianship responsibilities. Do all parties understand what is being considered here today? Yes, Your Honor. Rachel answered first, her voice calm. Yes, Noah said, barely louder than a breath. The judge turned her eyes toward Ethan. And how about you, young man? Are you happy living with Mr. Weston? Ethan glanced at Noah, then looked straight at the judge. We are now, he said, voice firm despite its softness. The courtroom stilled. The judge nodded slowly, then addressed Noah directly. Mr. Weston, do you understand the magnitude of this arrangement? That it is not temporary. That this is not a favor, nor a charitable act. This is a lifelong promise to raise, protect, nurture, and guide these children, emotionally, financially, and spiritually. Noah straightened his shoulders and looked her dead in the eyes. I understand, he said, and I choose it. The room seemed to exhale all at once. Rachel's fingers loosened their grip on the folder. Ethan's back relaxed slightly. Ava rested, her head on Mia's shoulder. The judge reached for her pen and signed the final line with a deliberate stroke. Then came the thump, the firm stamp against paper that echoed louder than expected in the small chamber. The courtroom clerk leaned over and collected the file, confirming the arrangement was now officially recognized by the state of California. It is so ordered, the judge said gently. May this family find peace, strength, and joy in the life they continue to build together. There were no cheers, no applause, just stillness. And then the quiet sound of Mia whispering to Ava, "We get to stay." Ava giggled. Ethan didn't say anything, but his eyes glistened as he stared at the floor. He didn't need to say it. Everyone in that room knew what he felt. Relief, validation, and for the first time in a long time, security. When they stepped outside the courthouse, the California sunlight hit them like a second kind of judgment. But this time, it was warm. It wrapped around them like a new beginning. The kids blinked up at the sky, and Rachel slipped her sunglasses on with a shaky sigh. Teresa was waiting by the sidewalk, already holding juice boxes and snacks in her arms, like it was just another field trip. Noah crouched to Ava and Mia's level. You girls want to pick lunch? Pizza! They shouted in unison. He smiled. Pizza it is. They loaded into the SUV, buckling the girls into their car seats. Rachel sat up front while Ethan took the seat beside Noah in the middle row. The ride home was filled with chatter about which toppings to get. Ethan leaned his head slightly against the window, but kept sneaking glances at Noah, like he was checking to make sure he was still there. When they reached the apartment, the kids bounded in like the space already belonged to them. It did. Ethan tossed his jacket on the couch. Mia climbed into Teresa's lap. Ava headed straight for her crayons. Rachel stayed for dinner, something that had become more frequent in recent weeks. But that night, she brought a gift. A framed picture drawn by the children, clearly done in crayon and smudged fingers. In it, 5 stick figures held hands beneath 3 yellow suns. They said they drew extra suns so it would always be warm, she said with a laugh. Noah didn't hesitate. He took down the abstract painting hanging above the couch, a soulless piece he had paid too much for years ago, and replaced it with the drawing. Later that evening, after Rachel had gone and the kids were tucked into bed, Ava in her pink pajamas, Mia snoring softly beside a worn teddy bear, and Ethan reading under the covers. Noah stepped out onto the balcony. The city stretched before him in glittering silence. Once, he had looked out at this view and seen only ambition, power, and profit margins. Now, All he saw were lights from homes, families, people. He ran a hand through his hair and let out a breath. He thought of that first moment outside Western Global, the tug on his sleeve, the quiet voice saying, "Please, my sisters are hungry." That plea had changed the trajectory of his life. And now, here he stood, not just as a guardian, not just as a man who stepped in, but as a father, one by choice, one by love. Noah Weston stood on the edge of his penthouse balcony as twilight descended over Los Angeles. Below, the city pulsed, with its usual rhythm, horns blaring, lights blinking to life, the endless murmur of ambition. But up here, in the stillness above it all, the world felt different. He was barefoot, dressed in a soft gray t-shirt and loose pajama pants. Nothing like the custom suits that once defined his existence. His hand rested on the cool glass railing as he looked through the wide windows behind him, where soft yellow light spilled from the apartment, and the echoes of little voices still lingered in the air. Inside, Ethan had just tucked his sisters in. Noah had watched him gently drape the blanket over Ava's small shoulders, then kiss Mia's forehead with quiet devotion. Not long ago, that boy had stood in the shadow of a skyscraper, barefoot and desperate, asking for help. Now, he moved through this home with a calm confidence, not just surviving, but finally living. Noah stepped back inside, walking past the framed crayon drawing that now hung above the couch. It showed 5 stick figures: him, Rachel, Ethan, Ava, and Mia, all holding hands under 3 big yellow suns. When he'd first asked Ethan what the suns meant, the boy had shrugged and said simply, "So it's always warm." The drawing had replaced a $40,000 piece of abstract art, and Noah hadn't missed it for a second. That night, dinner had been pure chaos. Ava had spilled milk on her dress. Mia insisted her broccoli was too green, and Ethan refused to eat until his sisters were full. Rachel had been there too, laughing from the far end of the table, her voice lighter than it had been in weeks. Her cane rested against the wall, and she used it for most of the evening. After dinner, Rachel had stayed to help with bedtime, reading a picture book with Mia curled in her lap and Ava nestled beside her. She had lingered a little longer than usual, sipping tea on the couch while Noah packed tomorrow's school lunches. There was no formal agreement between them, no labels, just a mutual rhythm that had formed over weeks of shared responsibility, gentle conversation, and a growing respect that couldn't be explained to the outside world. When she stood to leave, Rachel had looked around the apartment at the mess of Legos under the coffee table, the stack of board games on the sideboard, and the faint smell of apple shampoo hanging in the air, and smiled. "This place, it feels like home," she said softly. "It is," Noah replied. Now standing alone in the quiet, Noah moved to Ethan's room. The door was cracked just enough for him to peek inside. The boy slept soundly, his chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm. It struck Noah how rare that peaceful sleep must have been for Ethan before. For so long, the boy had been more parent than child, always bracing for the worst. But tonight, he looked like what he truly was, a kid. Noah closed the door gently and walked back to the living room. His eyes scanned the apartment, now dark except for the glow of the kitchen nightlight and the flicker of stars above the city. He sat down on the couch and sank into the cushions with a tired sigh. A year ago, his life had been ruled by numbers, stock values, freight metrics, and corporate earnings. Now, his schedule revolved around bedtime routines, peanut butter preferences, and music class pickups, and he wouldn't trade any of it. He thought back to the judge's voice at the courthouse just a few weeks earlier. "Mr. Weston, do you understand the full weight of this responsibility?" "Yes," he had said, and he still did. What he hadn't said then but felt with his whole being now was that the children hadn't just needed him. He had needed them. He needed the sticky fingerprints on the windows, The endless questions during car rides. The unexpected hugs after long days. He needed their chaos, their laughter, their hope. He needed Rachel's quiet strength, her resilience, her fierce, aching love for her children. He needed the way she spoke to them with gentleness, the way she cried when they called her Mommy, and the way she smiled when they called him Dad. By accident, and then by choice. Because that's what this had become, a choice, not born of obligation, not built out of convenience, but forged in the fire of uncertainty, anchored by moments of raw truth, and grown day by day with intention. Outside, the city shimmered. But Noah no longer felt part of that race. The man who had once raced the clock, who measured his worth by quarterly growth, who thought love came with terms and conditions, he had disappeared. In his place stood a man who folded tiny socks, wiped away tears, read bedtime stories badly, and laughed about it. A man who loved fiercely, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Because when Ethan had tugged at his sleeve and asked for help that day outside the Western Global building, Noah hadn't just said yes, he had said forever. As the clock neared midnight, Noah stood and walked once more through the quiet halls of his home. He paused outside the girls' room, smiling at the soft sound of Mia's snore and Ava's gentle sleep talking. Then he made his way to his own room, turned off the last light, and whispered to no one in particular, "Thank you for choosing me." Because this family, the one he never expected, had given him the one thing money never could: a reason to stay, a place to belong, and most of all, a heart that finally knew what it meant to be full. We'd love to hear what you think. Drop a comment below and rate this story from 10 to 100. Tell us where you're watching from too. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. And if this touched your heart, check out more uplifting videos by clicking on the end screen now.